The Detroit Lions wide receiving core is one that often gets overlooked by the NFL fans and media. It is a roster and it is a depth chart that is often called the worst in the NFC North, and some people go as far to say it is a bottom 10 unit in the NFL. However, today we're going to take a look at this roster. We're going to take a look at the depth chart. We're going to take a look at the roster battles. We're going to take a look at the roster bubble and take a look at what this Detroit Lions receiving core might look like in 2024 before setting the expectations for 2024. So with that being said, let's start off by taking a look at last year, how this bottom 10 receiving core did as a passing offense. Well, in 2023, the receiving core had 408 receptions for 4,606 yards, 30 passing touchdowns, while ranking as the second passing offense in the NFL. They were a top 2 passing attack in all of football last year, and they honestly haven't changed very much. Now, in the 2024 offseason, they did lose Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds is a player that had almost 500 yards for them a season ago, had a couple of touchdowns, was a reliable first down target, a player that is going to be missed by the Detroit Lions, and they re-signed backup tight end Brock Wright to a 3-year, $12 million contract. Outside of that and a few UDFA signings, they really haven't changed the receiving core at all. Amon-Ra St. Brown is still there. Jameson Williams is still there. Khalif Raymond is still there. Donovan Peoples-Jones is still there. You have Antoine Green still as a depth piece, right? The receiving core outside of Josh Reynolds hasn't really changed, and the tight end receivers haven't changed in the slightest. Now, going into 2024, there are 5 wide receivers that I would say are locks to make this roster. That being Amon-Ra St. Brown, coming off of an all-pro season with the Detroit Lions a year ago. Jameson Williams, the former first-round selection, the former 12th overall pick, who was, by all reports, having a phenomenal OTA, having a great minicamp, and ready to take that next jump into wide receiver 2 category. You have Khalif Raymond, who's consistently put up 500 to 600 yards for the offense every single year since joining the Detroit Lions 3 seasons ago. You have Donovan Peoples-Jones, a wide receiver that just in the 2022 season put up nearly 900 yards through the air as the Cleveland Browns' primary wide receiver 2. And then you have Antoine Green, a 6'2" wide receiver going into his second year of NFL play, who last year didn't get a whole lot of opportunities, had just 2 targets for 1 reception, but had a really strong preseason, showed the ability to stretch the field, and as a wide receiver 5, I think does a lot of good things for the offense, and I believe could be a solid piece to a wide receiving core looking to stay at the top of the NFL. Now, this wide receiving core is consistently talked about as one of the worst in the NFC North, one of the worst in the NFC Conference, and one of the worst or bottom 10 across the NFL. And I simply just don't see it, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown last season had over 1,500 yards and was an all-pro wide receiver. While Jameson Williams has yet to live up to the hype and the expectations of the 12th overall pick, he does have a lot of talent. It has been showed in his ability to make big plays. And if he can even get a little bit more consistent, you're talking about a player that could probably go for almost 1,000 yards a season if he can stay consistent and on the field. And we've seen the big play flashes. We've seen the big plays that JMO can make and the exciting plays that he has in him. And if he is as consistent, if he is as reliable as the reporters are saying he is from training camp, Jameson Williams is a legit 1,000-yard receiving threat. Khalif Raymond is a legit 500 to 600-yard receiving threat every single year, as is Donovan Peoples-Jones. Was traded to the Detroit Lions in Week 8 at the trade deadline, took a while to learn the playbook, wasn't really a prominent member of the game plan throughout the season, but now with a full offseason to learn the playbook, to work with Jared Goff, he's a guy that just, again, in 2022 had nearly 900 receiving yards. And yes, they lost Josh Reynolds. They lost about 70 targets and they lost about 600 yards and 3 touchdowns. But Jameson Williams can do that by himself. Donovan Peoples-Jones can add that by himself. And if anything, I think the Detroit Lions wide receiving core got more talented this offseason than it did less talented. And as we talked about a season ago, the Lions were the second best passing attack in football. And this isn't even mentioning the tight ends. This isn't mentioning Sam Laporta, who is the second target on this offense. It's not even mentioning Brock Wright, who is a security blanket for Jared Goff. It's not even mentioning, the rest of the tight end core that can be really solid in the passing game. We're just talking about wide receivers. And I think pound for pound, they got better this offseason than they were in 2023. Now, with those 5 guys being locks for the roster, there are a couple of guys fighting for spots. That being Trayquan Smith, the former New Orleans Saint, Maurice Alexander, the kick and punt return specialist in the preseason, Tom Kennedy, the preseason star for the Detroit Lions, Darius Fountain, a player that the Lions signed last offseason but never saw NFL action last year, Kaden Davis, a player that has been a practice squad hopeful and a guy that's kind of been bouncing around the NFL for the last couple of years, as well as undrafted rookie free agents Isaiah Williams and Jaylen Calhoun. Now, Trayquan Smith is a 6'1", 210-pound wide receiver. He spent his first 5 years with the New Orleans Saints, where he put up over 131 catches for 1,700 yards and 18 touchdowns. He was a really solid wide receiver 3 or 4 for the New Orleans Saints, and he's a guy that, much like Khalif Raymond, is going to consistently give you 4, 5, 600 yards, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 touchdowns a season. And he might not be the wide receiver 1. You might not want to put him out there every single rep to go against cornerback 1s, but he is a guy that has been consistently productive throughout his NFL career. And of course, with that New Orleans connection, he's a guy that is very much within the competition to make this roster as the final wide receiving threat. And I think the Lions could potentially go that way. He is a more veteran player. He's got more experience. I think he's got more, obviously, production throughout the NFL. And with that New Orleans Saints connection with Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn and the rest of the New Orleans Saints players that have been brought over, there's a good shot that Trayquan Smith takes up that wide receiver 6 role, and you have a good opportunity for Amon-Ra St. Brown to be your wide receiver 1, Jameson Williams to be your true wide receiver 2, and then you have a bunch of guys that are wide receiver 2 or 3 calibers, even going through your wide receiver 6. I think that Khalif Raymond is a potential wide receiver 3. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is a wide receiver 2. I think Trayquan Smith is a wide receiver 3 on this roster. And I think that even going down to Antoine Green, well, he's probably closer to a wide receiver 4 or 5 on the typical NFL roster. That leaves you with 1 wide receiver 1, a wide receiver 2, and 3 guys that you could really make the argument for that are wide receiver 3 caliber guys, being your 3, 4, and 5. Now, taking a look at some of the other players on this roster, of course, you have Maurice Alexander, 5'11", 174 pounds, with speed and quickness to be a great kick and punt returner. However, he is primarily a special teams guy. He's a player that doesn't see a lot of work even in the preseason as a wide receiver and really just brings special teams value to a roster, but that special teams value is likely enough for him to make the practice squad and be a player the Lions like to keep around in the event that maybe Khalif Raymond goes out with an injury or they just need that guy for kick and punt return roles. They like to have Maurice Alexander in their back pocket. Tom Kennedy, a preseason star for the last couple of years, has 14 regular season receptions for 195 yards. In the preseason over the last 3 years, has 29 catches, 326 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 drops through 8 games. He is a player that is just consistently really good at the preseason level, has gotten a little bit of work in the regular season, and a guy that just continuously comes back, always bounces back to the Detroit Lions roster, always seems to play well in the preseason, but never quite well enough to break and kind of get over the hump to make the active roster on a consistent basis. Now, Darius Fountain is a 6'2", 210-pound wide receiver, former 5th-round selection in 2018 by the Kansas City Chiefs. He has just 2 career receptions for 23 yards, and while his size and speed are pretty solid, he is a player that I think is kind of on the outside looking in on this roster, as is Kaden Davis, a 6'1", 190-pound wide receiver who does not have a regular season reception in his career. He has been bouncing around the practice squads of Arizona and Denver for the last couple of years, and while he has shown the ability to be a pretty good kick returner and had pretty good OTAs in minicamp, again, I think much like Darius Fountain, I think he's kind of on the outside looking in with a long shot to make this roster. And then you get to the undrafted rookie free agent, that being 5'10", 180-pound Isaiah Williams, a former quarterback with the Fighting Illini, but switched to wide receiver for his final 3 years, where he had over 214 catches for 2,304 yards and 13 touchdowns as a slot receiver, as well as Jaylen Calhoun, the 5'11", 190-pound wide receiver who played 5 years at Duke, put up 253 receptions, 3,026 yards, and 17 touchdowns through the air. I think both of them have a really good shot at competing for a practice squad spot. I think both of them are really solid wide receivers. I think they'll both be really good slot guys in the future, but as of right now, I just don't know if Jaylen Calhoun and Isaiah Williams are going to be the immediate impact that the Detroit Lions need or want from a depth wide receiver. So with that being said, I do think that Davis and Fountain get cut. I just don't think that they have enough to offer this roster to warrant keeping them around, right? I don't think that Fountain necessarily has the ability to play wide receiver as a starting caliber guy. I don't think that Lions are going to necessarily trust him if they have to rely on him as a wide receiver. And although I think Kaden Davis is potentially going to make this practice squad just based off of his ability and what he's done through OTAs so far, I don't really see him going much farther than the practice squad. And even then, I think there are some better practice squad options as well. Those better practice squad options would be Isaiah Williams and Jaylen Calhoun, two really young, really talented, undrafted rookie free agent wide receivers, guys with yak ability, guys with punt and kick return ability, guys that are kind of shifty after the catch and get you yards in that way. But guys that are just a little bit too young and guys that are a little bit too inexperienced for a team that's currently competing for a division title, a conference title, and a league title. They're going to need veteran leadership. They're going to need people that have experience in the NFL. And I just think if it comes down to undrafted rookie free agents or guys that have done it in the NFL for a couple of years, they're going to go with the NFL veterans, and then they're going to put the undrafted guys on the back burner for a little bit and potentially hold them for a year, 2 or 3 when they kind of develop a little bit, get caught up to NFL speed a little better, and then they can bring those guys to the active roster. And a very similar thing goes for Maurice Alexander, not really a wide receiving threat, but a great kick and punt return option, a guy that you're going to stash on the practice squad in case of injury, and a guy that is going to just kind of sit and wait for his opportunity to make the roster. So that officially leaves the Detroit Lions with 2 options. And I think that they're going to lean in the favor of Trayquan Smith, meaning the final roster is going to look like St. Brown at the 1, Jameson Williams at the 2. I think Khalif Raymond sees the 3rd most targets on this roster, but I think Donovan Peoples-Jones probably plays the X and boundary position a little bit more. I think Antoine Green makes this roster, and I think they lean towards Trayquan Smith, a player that has more experience, more statistics, a player that has been more productive in the NFL, of course, than Tom Kennedy, a guy that, again, I think is a true wide receiver 3 on a lot of rosters, but is going to be the Detroit Lions' likely wide receiver 5 or 6, a player that if you need to can have 30 to 40 receptions a year for 400 to 500 yards and 3 to 4 touchdowns, but a guy that probably won't get too much work if the injuries don't arise. But I think that the production at the NFL level, I think that the New Orleans connection, I think overall him being the most talented player in this Detroit Lions depth chart are all going to lead to him making this roster as the wide receiver 6, being kind of a veteran presence on a relatively young wide receiving core. And I think he's going to be a guy that is just at the bottom of the roster, but if you need to call on him, you feel comfortable targeting him. You feel comfortable throwing the ball his way. And I think that's what the Lions are going to want as they look to go back-to-back NFC North champs, potentially win the NFC conference, and represent the NFC in a Super Bowl opportunity. I think they're going to want the veteran. They're going to want the reliability. And I think that's why Trayquan Smith will make the roster. But with all that being said, let me know down in the comments below what you think about this roster. Do you disagree? Do you think that Trayquan Smith gets cut and you keep around Isaiah Williams or Jaylen Calhoun or, Kaden Davis or Tom Kennedy, right? Let me know down in the comments below what you think and how you think this roster should be constructed. But with all that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. If you've made it this far into the video, you clearly like the Detroit Lions content. And if you have yet to do so, please subscribe to the channel. We are 30 subscribers away from 4,000, and we are trying to hit that by the first day of training camp. So if we can do that, that'd be fantastic. If you could subscribe and help the channel out a ton. Obviously, being almost 14 minutes into a video talking about the Lions wide receivers 6 through 12, you obviously like the Detroit Lions content. So do me a favor, subscribe down below, helps the channel out a ton. With all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.